Hey everyone, I'm Jay Shear and welcome to Business Minds Coffee Chat. The goal of this show is to share insights, help to lift and inspire others, and deliver relevant, meaningful, and actionable content. Our guest today is both fascinating and intriguing. He's a former Wall Street lawyer who gave it all up to pursue a life filled with more purpose and meaning. He's a husband and father, a communications, social dynamics, and networking expert. He speaks 5 languages. As a teenager, he worked for the FBI, helping to catch pedophiles by pretending to be a teenage girl online. He ran a tour company taking Westerners to North Korea. He's been kidnapped twice in 2 different countries, and he's one of the most sought-after speakers in the world. And this is just scratching the surface. Prior to launching his own podcast in 2018, he was the host of another podcast, which averaged 4 million downloads per month. He has eclipsed that show in both downloads per month and in ranking. Please welcome the host of the Jordan Harbinger Show and the man who has been dubbed the Larry King of podcasting, Jordan Harbinger.
Hey.
Jordan.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, my man. Thank you so much for being here. I'm grateful for you.
Yeah, it's always fun to start the morning with a little show, a little video show. Makes you get showered at least.
That's good. Yeah, you and me both. Well, let's dive right in. I would love it, Jordan, if you would take us back to where you first discovered your passion for interviewing. And what were some of the early lessons that you learned that helped you sharpen your skills?
I actually started to get interested in interviewing. I was probably like 7 years into the show before I even really decided I was interested in interviewing. You know, subconsciously or whatever, unconsciously, I guess you would say, I really did like the conversational elements. Nobody does something for 7 years as a hobby / hobby business and then hates it, you know, for that long, at least not for 7 years. So I was doing something, but I never really thought of myself as an interviewer. And then I had on Robert Greene, the author of Mastery and 48 Laws of Power and the Laws of Human Nature. His titles are always a little bit, they're longer, and the book is so long, by the time you're done reading it, you forget what the title is. So I had Robert Greene on the show, and he's one of my favorite authors, so I have no excuse for stumbling on those names. But at the end of the interview, he's like, wow, this is good. You know, you're good at this. I've done a lot of media, and this is one of the best. And I was really blown away because I wasn't expecting to hear that. I wasn't really fishing for compliments. And I thought to myself, okay, what did I do different during this interview than during my other interviews for the show? And what I'd been doing was typically going into the show, knowing a little bit about the guest and having a conversation. And that's to this day what most journalists do, from what I understand. Okay. It's what most interviewers do, which I think is kind of a shame. So on that 7-year, and I remember it was the 7-year anniversary of the show, Robert Greene said, you know, you're really good at this, you know, something along those lines. And I thought, okay, I got to make sure that I read the book for every show, but I can't. It's too hard to read a book for every interview that I do. You know, I read like 2 books a year or 5 books a year. How am I going to read for every interview? And my wife said something like, well, you can try to outsource it or you can just figure out how to do it. And she didn't mean to be motivational, I don't think. But at the time, it was like, okay, do I really want to be really good at this? Or do I just want to go back to where I was before and pretend that I don't have time to put in the work that makes something really good? And I thought about it long and hard. And that's when I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get a Kindle and start reading. And I started reading, got faster, got an audiobook, realized I could read 3 times, 5 times, 10 times faster than that, and do it while walking outside and not getting distracted all the time. And that made my interview quality go through the roof. And I really started to realize, like, oh, okay, this is a skill you can improve. It's not just like this thing that you do. And I don't know what it is about skills, but it's like when you're riding a bike and you don't fall, you go, I can ride a bike. But then if you're a competitive bike racer, you don't think, well, I can just do this and not fall. No, you have like all these different things that you're doing. Swimming is the same. Any real skill has sort of the amateur level. Maybe it's a little harder with something like ice hockey. By the time you're suiting up and playing hockey, you know, you're playing hockey. But of course there's that next level. But I think a lot of us who don't have any skills like that, we never see it. And so I realized, looking back 2020 hindsight, at that time in my life, I was nowhere near, I was so unskilled that I didn't even realize that what I was doing was a freaking skill that I could improve. Does that make sense? It just
It
felt like an
does.
activity.
Yeah, it does. I'm curious though, what kind of feedback though did you get that told you that, hey, I need to improve these skills, right? This is an area I need to get better at.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the gap between whenever I don't read the book, I go in and I go, hey, Jay, I see that you do vision, values, and strategic planning because you have a poster behind you. Tell me about that. And you're like,
Mhm.
okay. But with Robert Greene, the interview was like, well, in chapter 3, you said this, but I'm wondering because in your previous book, you said this other thing, and I'm wondering how those two things reconcile. And it was just like nobody had done an interview like that with Robert Greene before that, and not really since then either, from what I've seen. I could be missing something. I'm sure there's some good stuff out there that I haven't seen of his, but or of other people interviewing him. But I realized, wow, this is like a huge gap between what I usually do and what I'm capable of.
Mhm.
So, do I really want to go back to doing a crappier job just because I'm like, reading is hard? Not really. And I did get through law school. So, it's not that I can't read, it's just that I hated reading on paper. And I thought, okay, 21st century, I'm using email. There's got to be a faster way to read. And what I notice a lot of hosts do, or a lot of journalists do, is they'll find some intern and be like, read the book and send me a summary, or they'll just read the book summary. But you can really tell when they've done that. I thought I was getting away with it too for a while. And then it was like, this is really clearly just the same as everyone else's interviews, because everyone else is either skimming the book, reading a summary, or getting the publicity points from the publicist, from the publisher, even like,
Sure.
oh, here's 5 bullets about Jay's consulting book, and you're like, hey, tell me why every company needs to be reliant on social media. Like, it's just the same talking points. But when you read the book, you go, all right, well, in this area, you told a story about how when you were young, you witnessed this car crash, and that made you look at human behavior under stress.
Mhm.
Tell us that story. And he's like, oh, nobody's ever asked me that before, even though it's in the book,
Sure.
right? Like, it's not a secret. I didn't get this from his best friend from elementary school. It's written in his work, but nobody has bothered to go that far for some
It
reason.
wasn't in the cliff
It
notes
wasn't in the
or the
Cliff
summary I
Notes.
received.
Right, exactly. So what's great about that is not necessarily being a particularly talented interviewer or host myself. In my own mind, I can just say, all right, well, okay, maybe if 10% of what makes the Jordan Harbinger show is good talent, if 10% of what it makes, say I can't even speak, let alone host a show. If 10% of what makes the Jordan Harbinger show, if 10% of that is just pure talent for some reason, and the other 90% is other things, then that's fine, because if like half of it, if 50% of it is just me working and outworking other people who are going to do interviews, I'm fine with that. If I have to spend 8, 10, 15 hours preparing for an interview and everyone else is going to spend like 15 minutes and I'm spending 15 hours, I'm going to do a better job. And if that's my competitive advantage, then fine, because nobody's getting more time. And so if I've prioritized this as my time, I know it's going to be hard for other people to prioritize their time to doing prep, because they're doing what I was doing 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, 7 years ago now. Yeah, 7.5 years ago now with Robert Greene. Before him, I was going, I literally said this to my wife, I'm getting away with this, and it's fine, and it's good enough, and I haven't heard any complaints.
Hmm.
And so this is all I really need to be doing. And then after that, I was like, am I really going to set the bar at no one has complained and I'm getting away with this? Like, what kind of pride do you take in your business if it's like you're getting away with it? We've all been to an I'm getting away with this restaurant, and you don't go back. We've all been to the I'm getting away with this auto repair shop, and you don't go back. We've been to the I'm getting away with this everything, and it's like, that's the 1 or 2 stars. That's the maybe even 3 if you're generous stars on Yelp. And we all know people who are like that in our companies, and we're like, this guy's on the chopping block and doesn't know it yet. So
Yeah.
I didn't want to set the bar at I'm getting away with this, and that's really what it was.
Yeah, well, I love that. That's a really powerful point, and that applies across business in general, not just in what you were doing, but
Yeah.
all across the board. And so I want to unpack just one piece of that if we can. And you touched
Mm-hmm.
on it, which was understanding that I need to go deeper, right? I need to read these books so I can ask better questions. So you do an amazing job of going deep and asking incredible questions of your
Thank you.
guests. Other than the reading of the material, kind of walk us through what the prep looks like. So kind of walk us through what that research process looks like. And the reason I want you to do that is because when I think of business leaders, when I think of client acquisition and trying to understand not only your competition, but also understanding this could be a potential client of mine. And when it comes to networking, which we're going to talk about, I need to do my homework. So for you, what does that process look like?
So the first thing that I do, well, it sort of depends, but let's assume it's a standard person with a book, right? Like a lot of people who come on the show have books, even if it's not a new book, even if they wrote the book 10 years ago. I routinely get people on that are like, my 2011 book. And I'm like, yeah, it's on this topic. And you're the guy who wrote the book on that, on antiquities theft. You know, there's just not a whole lot of books on the subject that are acclaimed or have more than one review. So I'll read that typically through audio. You know, I throw it in my phone and I do some technical stuff that you probably don't care about with the audio file. But then as I'm reading, I take notes in Google Docs on my phone or with a computer, but usually I'm outside walking. And I do that because one, it's a great way to burn some calories, work on my dad bod outside. And the other reason is because I find that just being kind of hyperactive in a lot of ways, and I don't know if I'm technically like ADHD or whatever, but if I'm sitting down in my house, I got to occupy myself by doing something. And reading by listening, I'll get distracted and I'll be like, oh, shoot, I just started cleaning out the garage and now I have no idea what the last half an hour was. So I got to rewind. But if I'm outside walking, I'm occupied just enough. It's like being in the shower. I have to pay attention so I don't get hit by a car and die or trip on a crack and fall. But everything else is kind of free to think and digest the information that I'm getting. So I start taking notes on my phone and I create a huge file of notes. Then I go and look at their Wikipedia and I look at like their Amazon reviews, usually the negative ones, if there's any good ones. And that usually will do it. If they have any talks, of course, I'll watch those. If they have other interviews from other people that are credible, I'll watch those. I don't do any of those like motivational like things. But if they have like a TED talk or they've done an episode with a good podcast host or radio host, I'll watch or listen to that. And then I take notes on all that. And then after that, all that's done, I go through the notes like the night before or the morning of the show, and I organize them in a completely different way. So I think about how the conversation might go. It never goes that way, by the way, but I think about how it might go. And then I organize the notes according to topic, where I might steer things. And as I'm reading those notes, which I could have written weeks or months prior, I might read something and then have a question about that. And then I write my own question about my own notes underneath. If it's a question that I can ask the guest, usually it is, you can usually ask them anything. So I might say something like, you know, did 2 tours in Fallujah. And then that's the note. But then when I'm reading the notes, it might be like, oh, I wonder if him doing 2 tours in Fallujah had anything to do with him starting a company about prosthetics. It must have. Let me see what's going on here. So then I write that there. And then you'd be surprised how many times you'll ask, so did doing tours in Fallujah and maybe seeing people get damaged from battles and war, did that provide the foundation? And they're like, well, I didn't think about it back then, but I did see a lot of friends and even civilians lose limbs. And I think that's what put the bug in my head. Nobody has that information because nobody put that together. And maybe that wasn't even in the book. Maybe he didn't even realize, you know, that's the reason. So that's how you get good stuff out of people, in my opinion. You know, you really have to read everything, and you have to read stuff that you think you don't have to read. Like the reason you can't outsource this well is because, and this is a real example from like 10 years ago, I interviewed this infectious disease doctor, and she was from somewhere in Africa, and I can't remember now. It was like sub-Saharan Africa. She was adopted from there, brought to Canada, I think, by her parents. So she wrote a book, and the book says dedicated to my parents. But for you, I would never have grown up in Canada, but would, you know, on the dark something like that. It's something that I knew where it was. So I Googled, I found out where she was born. And then I was like, when we were doing the interview, I said, do you think that there is an element of almost survivor guilt that you have from being adopted from this country in Africa, which I, again, can't remember the name of right now, and you becoming an infectious disease specialist? And she said, yeah, without a doubt, I think growing up there in Canada made me realize how lucky I was. And then maybe I could sort of import some of my luck, you know, back to where I was from, where kids grow up and go blind because of malnutrition or like get bitten by a mosquito and lose their limb. And she's like, nobody's ever asked me that. And I'm like, this is literally the first page of your book after it's like published in 2019, HarperCollins, right? The first thing is the dedication, and nobody bothered to read it. They just skip it. Yet it was like the whole point of her career was based on that. And it wasn't written anywhere else in the book because it was a book about something else. It wasn't really about her.
That is really interesting in the fact that you're able to look at the information that way and see things that other people are just skipping over or
Yeah.
don't care to spend the time to get to know, and then tie that back
Yeah.
to a salient point. That's really cool. So let's talk for a moment about what's happening in the world today, and how are you processing what's happening, and how has it impacted your business?
You know, for me, it's been tempting to be like, here's what I think about everything. But I've resisted that because now's probably a good time to listen to the people that are being affected mostly by this, not to write my dissertation on race relations in 2020, especially because I think a lot of people, I don't know if you watched the Dave Chappelle special, if that's up your alley or not. He's got this recent, yeah. You know who Dave Chappelle is, though, right?
Oh, yes.
So he did something recently, and he was essentially saying, and I won't repeat it because, family friendly show, Dave Chappelle comedy don't always blend over together well.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. He said something along the lines that basically he implied that nobody cares what celebrities think, and I don't mean to bucket myself as a celebrity, but still, as anybody who has a platform of any kind, nobody really cares what we think. Like, people will say, I'm really curious to hear what you think about this, but at the end, but the world at large doesn't need to know like what a lot of us think. So I'm happy to answer your question as far as my own personal experience, but I will say that the reason I haven't said more about it is because my opinion matters less, and what I've been trying to do is offer up my platform as an interviewer and get really interesting people on who can add to the conversation rather than me trying to just add to the conversation. And I think more people should do that. That's just my 2 cents.
So
Also,
let me stop you there then for a moment, because I respect the fact that you are using your platform as that type of opportunity for others who are knowledgeable in an area to be able to speak to it, right? To be able to educate, so we all can learn. So let's tie it back then to what's happening with the pandemic and with COVID-19, and talk about that impact on your business, because you do a lot of speaking around the world. Most of the shows that I've seen that you've done were always live in person. You had a guest sitting right there. So I want to talk about the differences in those areas. How does that impact your business? And what are the dynamics like now doing this sort of thing, where we're not sitting next to one another versus being in the same room together?
Yeah. Sorry, I was unclear on which tragedy of 2020 you were referring to when you
My
said
apologies. I didn't clarify.
Yeah, and in 3 months, people are going to be like, are they talking about the big asteroid, the alien invasion, COVID-19, or the rioting? I can't. You guys got to clarify this stuff for the audience here. Come on.
Yes.
So, look, it's June, okay? So whatever happened after June, all bets are off. It's not our fault. We didn't speak about that. COVID-19 has affected a lot of things. For example, I did usually do my shows in person. I got to be honest, though. I'm kind of liking the remote thing. I don't love cheesy Zoom backgrounds that don't always work well. I don't love having like a sheet of paper behind me. I'm moving, so that will change eventually. But, for a lot of us, we don't want to build a set in the house. So I used to travel and do the shows in person. But I feel like the conversations are pretty much, I wouldn't even say just as open. I would say they're more open because now I'm not sitting in a weird chair, like cheating 45 degrees to the camera. I'm not like holding in a bladder full of coffee, you know what I mean? Like during the interview, I could right now go, hey, just cut this. And I'm not sitting in your office going, ooh, it's really echoey in here. I wasn't expecting that. Hey, get out the headsets and see how those sound. No, you have your setup. It's fine. I have my setup. It's fine. And right before COVID, before everything shut down, I was just saying, oh, you don't have a podcast set up at your house? Fine. Go to this recording studio, we'll book for you. And they show up and it's all good, right? It's all fine. Now, what I've been doing, because recording studios are closed except for in some of these some of these other states. Shout out to the people who give 0 Fs about coronavirus, I guess. Your choice. So those places are open. Most places aren't. So what I've been doing is just saying, look, do you have a USB microphone? Oh, you don't? Okay, great. Well, I'll mail you one and send you a pair of headphones. And you as a podcaster will be surprised how many people are like, I do not own headphones. I do not have a USB microphone. And I thought, but you've been doing media for like 3 years. What do you use? I ask them after the show, and they go, what's funny is they'll go, yeah, whenever I'm on Fox, they just have me set up my iPhone or my iPad, and I lean it against a couple books, and that's what I use. And I go, that explains so much
Wow.
about why the audio quality is not good. He's like, yeah, I'm just sitting in my kitchen, and I'm like, this sounds horrible. So
Hmm.
somebody at Fox and whatever, and it's not just Fox, but it seems to usually be with some of the guests I've had recently, or MSNBC. They just clean the audio as best they can, but it still sounds bad. And I thought, if these guys really wanted to if I'm sending people $50 microphones, I'm not sending them a $400 kit with an interface. I'm sending them a $50 microphone and a pair of $20 headphones that are not, you wouldn't listen to a concerto on those things, right? And that's it. And they're like, oh wow, this is really good. Oh, this is really good. So it's shocking to me. The bar is still low in certain areas. So I've just been sending them the gear, and I'm thinking, I'm saving a lot of money on studios. I'm saving a lot of money on a lot of hassle, a lot of money on flying to them. So now I think as a result of this, I know a lot of people are like, we're ditching our office. We're all remote. I wouldn't say I'm 100% remote. Like if I get a super big celebrity guest and they're like, yeah, show up to my office, I'm not going to not go and experience that just because it's cheaper and easier for me to stay home, because there's some things are just worth taking some good photos and maybe making sure. The other thing that in person does that remote won't do is if I'm sitting in the office with Howie Mandel, he's not going to be like, TikTok, buddy, let's go. If I'm in there with Howie Mandel, I was watching TV with him. We were going over the America's Got Talent buzzers awards he was giving out. He was explaining things to us. He gave us a tour of his office.
Mhm.
They were really, really cool. And that was a worthwhile experience. But for the 95% of my interviews, I think I'm just going to sit at home, put on a shirt, no need for pants at Zoom, and just do my interviews and not even worry about it. Cause this stuff it's so much easier. And I was resistant to this before, but now Squadcast is going to have, they have like HD video recording, and this audio is really good. It's much better than Zoom, frankly. So I'm just going to use that. And I think, look, it's an 80-20 scenario where, like, yes, I could get better video quality. Yes, I could probably control the audio quality a little bit more. And there might be a little bit of magic to doing something in person, but really I can do this for a fraction of the cost. The cost of the flight to some of these places, plus the overnight hotel, that alone, forget camera crew, forget everything else, that alone is usually more than I spend on the production of the entire show.
Wow.
So we're talking, I'm doing it for a third of the cost if I stay remote. So that's been pretty tempting.
It is quite amazing that we're able to do this. And I love the technology aspect of it. I absolutely miss being in front of somebody, getting the body language, and there's just there's a feeling that we get that we can that I haven't been able to capture when
Yeah.
we're doing something virtually like this. So tell me about speaking engagements and networking that you do. So are you still doing some speaking engagements virtually?
I am. I'm surprised. I thought, okay, everyone's going to cancel. Let's just accept that. Um, but this this whole environment has resulted in people really dramatically rethinking everything, just like we have just discussed. And I'm trying not to be rude about it, because I do like speaking, and I think there is value to doing something virtually. But I guess candidly, I understand a little bit less why somebody would pay the full fee to have someone, because the talk is about like the impact, and they're on stage and there's an event and everything like that. The information is usually not as important as the actual performance of giving a talk. So why somebody would like pay you the same amount to do it virtually is a little bit beyond me, but I'm not going to complain, because
It's happening.
I mean, it's happening, and it's like, okay, if I'm going to be able to spend more money than I spent on the first year of going to college, if I'm going to make more money than I did, spent on my first year college tuition, giving a talk like from my den with I'll probably put pants on for the talk just because you want to get invited back. But like that alone, it's just shocking. I think part of it is me just being kind of mind blown about how hard it was and how broke I was when I was a kid versus now. I don't know about you, but I never thought, oh, I'm going to be like a wealthy but business owner. Like that never occurred to me. So it's just kind of funny when someone says, we'll give you X $1,000 to come on Zoom. And I just go, hey, are you sure? Like, I don't want to, but you're sure? All right, so get Jen, send her an invoice right now. Get him to sign, because I'm still kind of in disbelief. And I think technology does that. I'm not doing this to brag. What I'm saying is technology does this to you because you go, wait a minute, I can do my whole show remotely over Zoom. Wait a minute, I can appear and do my speaking over Zoom. Wait a minute, I can do this other thing remotely or in this different way, or I can outsource this to the Philippines for $5 an hour. That's like, this doesn't seem right. It's so good. It almost seems illegal, right? Or something. It's like, what am I going to do?
So it's forced you to shift your thinking. It's forced you to figure out ways to adapt and continue to thrive. And the reality is there's an audience out there, right? So there's an audience that wants to hear you talk about specific topics. And that's a fantastic thing. The market will decide if it's worth it or not. And clearly in this particular case, it is. There's so many different directions, Jordan, that I would love to go with you, but because of the amount of time we have together, there's one thing that I definitely wanted to tap into, and it's the networking side of what you do. You are a networking expert, and you have courses that are available, one of which part of that course is available for free. So speak to that for a moment.
I teach a lot of networking skills, both to corporations, then also to civilian and military organizations and things like that, intelligence agencies. The key is always consistency. And so doing something every single day, that's why we call it 6-minute networking, and it's free. There's no upsell. There's no like graduation part that costs money or anything. I just wanted to help people, especially now, although I released the course years ago. Now I just recently revamped it a little bit because now's the best time to be creating relationships because a lot of us are isolated. So the psychological support is there, but also if the economy starts to go into a slump, the economy has started to go into a slump, it's great to have your relationships ready because if you need to switch jobs, if you need to switch careers, there's a little schmutz on the lens here. This is not focusing. There we go. That's got to be it. That was weird. It was like I was blurry, and then there we go. Since the economy has changed and taken a little bit of a nosedive in some ways, now's a great time to seek some stability. Now, yes, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. So you really do need to dig the well before you're thirsty. A lot of us, unfortunately, are thirsty right now because we've been laid off, let go, lost our job. Business is really slow. We've got to generate new clients because they went out of business. We don't know. So those of us that have been working on our network for years are now really seeing why that's important. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people that have not worked on their network at all, and now they're going, uh-oh, now I've got to be weird and reach out to people. So I give sets of drills and techniques to 1, kick off the rust, 2, start seeing some responses right away, 3, it's all remote. None of it is like, go to a networking mixer. Those things don't work. You're off the hook. It literally takes 5 minutes a day because you don't have to go to these stupid events to like drink Kool-Aid and eat stale cookies and be like, yeah, no thanks. I already have a financial planner. Like you don't have to do any of that stuff. It's just email, phone lists, and certain types of value add relationships. So thank you for bringing that up. I'd love it if people check that out.
Absolutely. And we're going to give a link here in a moment where they can find more information about you. So before I ask my last question, then let's share with everybody where we can go to engage with you, to tap into the world of Jordan Harbinger.
Sure. I'm at Jordan Harbinger on Twitter, Instagram, social media. jordanharbinger.com. But of course, if you're listening to this as a podcast, I'm the Jordan Harbinger Show, anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify. And of course, there's some interviews on YouTube, not as many because much of what I do is audio. But yeah, I would love it if people check out the Jordan Harbinger Show and then 6-Minute Networking, which is at jordanharbinger.com/course.
Fantastic. And we will go ahead and put those links in the show notes as well. And I would highly encourage everyone to listen to Jordan's podcast. Check out that website. You will become a better thinker. That I promise you. So here's my final question to you. Tony Robbins has said that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of the questions you ask. So, Jordan, what are 1 to 2 questions you're asking yourself right now in order to take your life and business to even greater heights?
So I'm asking how big do I want to be? And that's not one of those like inspiring, how big do you want to be? It's like, no. How much do you want to scale the business? Because what I've found is I'm pretty happy right now. I've got a pretty solid income right now. Um, do I want more? Who doesn't? But then I have to be like, okay, what scale am I willing to get to before? Where do I draw the line at like the stress that goes with the scale? Because there are a lot of people that go, oh, if you hired a social media team and then you did this and then you were on this platform and then you also did more video and then you did live events and you got to do like monthly live things where you sell tickets. Da-da-da. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would make an extra dollars. But then it's like, oh wait, but then I'm managing a social media team, traveling around doing live events, have to sell tickets on the show all the time. And that in exchange for this, nah, no thanks. I'd rather take what I'm making now and keep it rather than like doubling my stress, tripling my stress, halving my free time and making twice as much money. Who cares about twice as much money? And even if it was like 10 times as much, I'd still have to think about it because I really don't want to do a lot of that stuff. And I've met a ton of people that make like $10 million a year. They're miserable. And I'm thinking, so what? So you have a boat now? Like, who cares? You've never even used it. Just rent the boat, save the money, and spend a lot more time reading and hanging out with your kids. But it's really hard. You can get really addicted to that. So how big do I want to be? And then also like which part of me is making this decision? So like if I go, yeah, but then I'd have like 10 million this followers, whatever. Okay, which part of me is making that decision? Is it the part that goes, yes, and then you'll have this economic freedom and that'll allow you to do this? Or is it like, then I'll look really cool on the internet? So you have to really be careful what part of you is making this decision. Is it just pure vanity, pure ego? Because if so, like, you're probably not going to be happy with that in the long run.
Yeah, that's good. Some couple really good questions to deep dive into. Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it, and thank you so much for being here today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I greatly appreciate you sharing of your time, of your resources and insights, and it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right. So I'd also like to thank our amazing sponsors of this episode, Elevate Events, Peralta Design, Networking and Diners Virtual, and Chenzo Does Web. And for the rest of you, thank you very much for watching. And if you found value in this episode, you know what to do. Go ahead and like and share with your friends and also subscribe to this channel. And until next time, stay healthy and optimistic, keep learning and growing, and remember that transformative change in your life and business always begins with you, and nothing happens until you take action. And we'll see you next time on Business Minds Coffee Chat.